This is Frederick from Detroit, Berlin, channel about modular gear, music gear in general, and some music production tips. This is the third episode of the A-155 and A-154, the analog trigger sequencer and the sequencer controller. Today I'm using two analog trigger sequencers in a 16-step mode. I already kind of explained it in the sequencer controller video, but I will show you how the patch is made, and what's even more interesting, I will take the sequencers out of my system and I will film the back, because it's really important to get the connections right, and I will make an overview on how you do that, which connections to make and what to take note of. So, without further ado, let's quickly go over the patch and then over, not really over the module, but over the concept behind the 16 steps and the way you can use it. This will be a shorter episode, so please stay tuned, and here we go. So the sequencer controller, like I explained in that video, I will put a link to the video in the description down below. You have a steps switch, and you can switch between 8 and 16 steps. What this does, it sends out a voltage every 8 steps. So the first time you get no voltage, the first 8 steps. The second time it goes over the 8 steps, it will send out a voltage. So with a voltage controlled switch like the A-150 dual VCS from Doepfer, you can patch both sequencers in the input, and then the output will go to your oscillators, your pitch, your whatever. And the sequencer controller, it will send out the high voltage, the 9th to 16th step, and that way you will switch between two sequencers. What this means is that for every trigger that you want to send out, for everything, you actually need one voltage controlled switch. So with the dual voltage controlled switch, you have room for one trigger or a gate and one pitch CV, or two pitch CVs, or two triggers or trigger and a gate. With two dual VCS you will have 4 outputs. You need those dual voltage controlled switches to make this work. Although you can make this work, make kind of a 16-step sequence with one sequencer using the sequencer controller and a dual VCS. With two analog trigger sequencers you get one row of 16 steps with the 1 volt, the 2 volt and the 4 volt CV range, and one with the scale knob, which is a kind of a continuous from 0 to 100% scale of control voltages. Those two trigger sequencers, analog trigger sequencers from Doepfer, you can make really interesting patches. You can still use the first and the last step, and what this will do, if you set the last step to like step 6, then it will only have 6 steps, and then it will continue to the lower sequencer, which means that in total you get 12 steps. So that way, with the last and the first knob function on that trigger, on that sequencer controller, you can create as many and as little steps as you want. Of course, the minimum is 2, and it will always be even. It won't be odd steps. You can make two pretty long sequences, and let's go over the patch. I got the two trig 2 rows going into the upper voltage controlled switch part. Then I got the step switch going into a multiple. I have two patch cables going into both CV triggers of the voltage controlled switch, which means that when the signal is low, it will stay at position 1. When the voltage is high, it will switch to the other position. And that way you can switch between two sequencers. Then those triggers are going into the quad ADSR, of which the first row is controlling the amplifier, the second row is controlling the VCF8 filter. Already did a video on that one. We'll try to link it in the description down below. Then the third row is controlling the CV2 function of the Doepfer oscillator, the A-110, which is actually just a pitch envelope. Then the tune is controlled by the CV of the analog trigger sequencers, the top row of knobs, which has the 1, 2 and 4 volt range. So that's going into the voltage controlled switch, which is then going through the dual quantizer and then into the pitch of the VCO. VCO going into the VCF8 filter, which is CV controlled by the bottom row of the bottom sequencer going directly in the filter, which means it only has 8 steps or less steps if you adjust the first and the last step on the controller. It will go into the CV3 input of the VCF8, so it's controlling the opening and the closing of the filter, along with the ADSR controlling the opening and closing of the filter. And then the bottom row of the top analog trigger sequencer, that's actually going into the speed of the clock. So when I turn up the clock CV, the speed of the clock will be modulated. You can create kind of fluent rhythms. You can create some more motion. Then the signal is going into a spring reverb and then into the matriarch, which is only adding a little bit of delay. That was the patch you just heard. And now let's take a look at how to connect one trigger sequencer to the sequencer controller and how to connect both analog/trigger sequencers A-155s to the A-154 sequencer controller from Doepfer. I will try to explain what is going on with the connections. So you got the sequencer controller, the A-154, you got the two analog/trigger sequencers, the A-155 from Doepfer. This cable is going to the bus board. Both analog trigger sequencers are not going to the bus board. There can only, in a situation of an analog trigger sequencer and a sequencer controller, or two analog trigger sequencers and a sequencer controller, there can only be one cable going to the bus board. Everything is powered through the sequencer controller. This first pin, which is normally a cable going to the bus board, you need to disconnect it on both analog trigger sequencers. Then you got this cable, which is in this instance connected via kind of, I would say a splitter, but it's a cable with two connections. One is connected to the first one, the top one is connected to the end. When you only have one analog trigger sequencer that is connected to the end, there will be a cap on here when you're using one sequencer to send the signal through to the sequencer. You need to remove the cap if you're using two sequencers, and you need to plug the lower sequencer's cable into this, which is going to the control side. So this is a control board with the red line down. It's plugged in at this side, so at the side of the control board. You've got the control boards on both sequencers. If you're using one, so the first one will still have the control board connected to the knobs side of the sequencer controller. So this control board, so the second pin, is going to the sequencer controller, and this control board is totally bypassed. So this start, stop, reset and clock board, it's totally bypassed. With this one, you still can use it in manual mode. The switch manual mode switches between using this control board and this control board with the start, stop, reset and clock signals. If you have only one analog trigger sequencer, it's connected to the end of this cable. Here will be a cap and it will go into that side with the red cable at the bottom. This is connected to the control board of the sequencer. If you have a second one, that second one is connected to the middle. You first need to remove a plug and then connect it to the middle of this cable, which is connected to the controller side of that sequencer controller. One goes to the top one, one goes to the bottom one. That's the way it's connected. You don't have any connections here and you only have the lower connection here, and it's connected to the sequencer controller to this side. And that means if you remove that cable, you lose the manual function of the sequencer. You cannot directly input something into the sequencer. I think that will be the only disadvantage if you remove this cable. No power to the bus board from the sequencers, only from the sequencer controller. Otherwise, you will probably fry some stuff, and this is too expensive to fry. So be very careful to not connect the analog trigger sequencers to the bus board. Only connect this one. Just remove the cables and use these cables connected to the controller side and this cable. I think it's pretty optional, because if you do not connect this cable, you only will lose the manual function of this sequencer, I assume. But you can connect it and then you can switch between a clock going into this sequencer and another clock going into this sequencer and flip between both automatically or via the switch, like explained in my previous sequencer controller video, which I will link in the description down below. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, join my Patreon if you want to support me more. By the way, these modules were sent to me by the distributor of Doepfer A-155, and yeah, I'm very grateful they give me the opportunity of doing some reviews on these modules. I try to keep everything as positive as possible because I like those Doepfer modules a lot, but if there are issues I will certainly tell, or if I have divided opinions I will definitely sprout them. So yeah, I hope you like this video and hope to see you soon. Bye bye.